The Morgan house stood at the edge of Duscombe Hollow like a relic of pride and permanence, white stone walls cloaked in ivy, slate roof weathered by 100 Dorset rains, and windows that blinked out austere silence. It had been in the family for 90 years, a fact Eliza Morgan knew better than anyone. She'd spent years trimming the hedges, sanding floorboards, and restoring the creaky staircase banister no one else cared to fix. To outsiders, it was a testament to legacy. To Eliza, it was a gilded cage. Inside, the scent of lemon polish clung to the air like duty. Her parents, Frances and Gerald Morgan, sat in their usual places in the sitting room. Her father read the paper. Her mother knitted. The television stayed off. It was tea hour, after all. When Eliza walked in with her sketchbook under her arm, neither looked up. They didn't need to. Her presence, however constant and helpful, was not a cause for acknowledgement. Every day, Eliza walked the fragile scene between hoping and holding back. She cooked, she paid bills, she chauffeured her parents to doctor visits. And every time she mentioned her fashion sketches, her dream of launching a sustainable clothing brand, Frances would scoff and Gerald would mutter something about real work. They'd smile for the church ladies and call her such a dear help, then whisper at night how she lingered too long in fairy tales. She had saved for years, hiding small amounts in a tin box marked buttons beneath a drawer lined with ribbon. Eliza wasn't naive. She knew freedom had a price. But it wasn't just about moving out. It was about being seen. It was about truth. She had poured her soul into this house, transformed the abandoned granary into a studio, brought her grandfather's rusted watches back to life, documented every repair, every rediscovery. Yet her efforts were repaid in condescension, in erasure. Family means sacrifice, her mother would say. Eliza once believed that. Now, standing in the hallway where generations of expectation echoed through the floors, she wasn't so sure that Eliza's evenings belonged to her hands. By day, she fit dough under her nails and aches into her joints, serving sourdough and almond croissants in the village bakery. But when the door creaked shut behind the last customer and the sky glowed lilac over Dorset fields, she walked home with purpose. Past the moss-covered stone wall, across the garden she had coaxed from thistles, and into the granary-turned-studio she'd renovated board by board. Inside, silence wrapped around her like an old friend. Here, every muted creak of floorboard and hum of sewing machine spoke her language. On the wooden work table, bolts of fabric lay like blank canvases. Patterns sketched on tracing paper fluttered when she opened the window. Her fingers, calloused yet nimble, stitched threads into shapes that felt almost like prayers, quiet tributes to freedom, heritage, and self-belief. It wasn't just fashion. It was memory, storytelling, reclamation. She used linen inherited from her grandmother's dowry chest, threads dyed with petals from the same rose bushes she had planted as a teenager. Her designs were careful fusions of the old and new. Edwardian trims redrawn with clean silhouettes, traditional smocking reimagined with modern form. Each piece carried a name, the Vida, the Margaret, the Eleanor, female ancestors from her mother's side whose stories had long vanished beneath family trees trimmed for men. Her parents rarely entered the space. They dismissed it as a hobby shed, yet they relished the garden's tidy borders and the electricity she had rewired. There was irony in how much of the Morgan estate ran on her overlooked labor. Even when her fingers cramped after hours tracing watch gears onto fabric panels by candlelight, she never complained aloud. Whether it was the precision of restoring broken watches from leather pouches or hand-embroidering coat linings with grandfather's winding patterns, Eliza stitched in silence, because that was what devotion looked like. Swift, unseen, unappreciated. But with every stitch, she wove something stronger than fabric. She wove resilience. One design, delicately hung on a dress form, remained unfinished. A coat lined with silk printed with antique blueprints of a 1912 pocket watch, the one she'd restored at 16 after everyone else had deemed it unfixable. She didn't know its future. Only that when it was finished, something in her life would be, that Eliza woke that morning with a quiet hope blooming in her chest. It was her 28th birthday, an age she had once told herself would mark freedom, progress, maybe even a storefront in town. For a brief moment, she allowed the fantasy room to breathe. Sunlight glinted through the lace curtains, spilling across her sketch pad, where the night before, she had inked a new design inspired by sea glass and her grandfather's compass rose. Downstairs, the house was unusually calm. Her mother, Frances, greeted her with her usual clipped smile over the kettle. No card. No special breakfast. Gerald, reading the paper, didn't even glance up. "You're almost 30, he muttered after a sip of tea. "Time to stop with the childish dreams, don't you think?" Eliza straightened, quiet but steady. "Actually, I wanted to tell you both. I've made arrangements. I'm moving to Bristol at the end of the month. I found a place. I'll be launching my own collection there." For a second, the silence was hopeful. Then came Gerald's chuckle, deep, sharp, slicing. Frances joined with a breathy snort, eyes cold with disbelief. "Please," she scoffed. "You honestly think that sewing in the attic is a career now?" "You'll be back by Christmas," Gerald said. "Mark my words. Once the money's gone and you've gotten it out of your system. Well, the door'll still be here. But the will won't wait," Frances added, tapping her nails on the table. "We sorted it last spring. Best to set things straight, no." Eliza blinked. "What do you mean?" Frances fixed her with a condescending smile. "The watches, the house, your brother will handle it all eventually. You're leaving, sweetheart. Legacies stay with those who stay." That night, Eliza sat huddled in the granary, breath ragged, journal open but untouched. The disbelief bled into heartbreak. Every corner of this property bore her labor: patched fences, hand-tilled gardens, restored timepieces she'd cataloged from brittle paper stacks. They had never seen her, not truly. But by the time the candles flickered low, her resolve burned brighter than ever. Let them laugh, she thought quietly. They'll choke on their pride soon enough. And just like that, the invisible chains around her wrists began to fall away. Eliza leaned against the wooden frame of the granary window, watching the golden light stretch across the fields like fingers reaching for something just out of touch. The scent of lavender from her carefully pruned garden wafted through the open panes. It had been her sanctuary since she was 16, a place where her mother's scorn couldn't echo and her father's silence couldn't smother. But now, even here, she couldn't escape the chill of betrayal. It had been her cousin Jane who told her, hesitantly, over a lukewarm cup of tea at the village cafe. The will had been changed almost a year ago. Every heirloom watch, every family relic that Eliza had poured time and devotion into had been officially allocated to Theo. Eliza wasn't even mentioned. Not once. No one had thought to inform her, not her parents, and certainly not Theo. The watches she'd spent nights cataloging. The ones she had dug out from storage trunks, polished, researched, and kept ticking. They were more than antiques. They were stories, lessons in craftsmanship, little pieces of her grandfather's soul. And apparently they had all been casually reassigned without so much as a conversation. For days, she said nothing, choosing instead to move mechanically through her bakery shifts and late-night pattern making. But inside, something was cracking. The silence of omission spoke louder than any insult her parents had ever thrown at her. It confirmed what she had long suspected but refused to accept. She was never meant to inherit anything. Her role had always been as caretaker, never successor. The bitterness didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, like frost creeping across a window pane. Disappointment turned to understanding. Understanding to disillusionment. And then, finally, a spark of something else. She didn't name it just yet, but it was brewing. Back in the granary, Eliza found herself running her fingers along the polished edge of her grandfather's toolbox. It was filled with sketches, restorations, notes logged in her own meticulous handwriting. Proof of her labor, her connection, her legacy. Something her brother didn't even know existed. No, they may have changed the will, but they hadn't erased her work. Not while each sun sank low over the Dorset hills, filtering golden light across rows of lavender Eliza had planted herself. The garden behind the Morgan home was no longer the weed-ridden patch it had been when she was 19, angry, defeated, and fresh out of university with no real plan. Back then her parents told her, "You can stay here until you've figured yourself out, but don't expect handouts." What they never acknowledged was how she stayed and slowly transformed the forgotten corners of their property into something vibrant. Every flower bed bore her touch, from the climbing roses to the mosaic stone path winding through rosemary and thyme. She'd spent years cultivating calm here, trimming hedgerows after work, sketching beside the sundial she restored, teaching herself botany with library books everyone mocked her for borrowing. And still, none of it was enough. The garden had grown under her patient care, yet the family that shared the house never saw her. Her father told visitors the landscaping was the work of hired help. Her mother once said the lavender was too garish, though she clipped armfuls for church events and took the praise gladly. Despite their barbed remarks, Eliza loved that garden. She had made it beautiful without permission, without credit. It was hers, a truth that gave her a quiet, burning strength. When packing to leave, she walked every curve of it one last time, her fingertips brushing petals like farewells. She took the hand-painted garden labels she'd created, the ones that said hope near the hollyhocks and resilience by the stone bench. Her aluminum box, labeled art, carried more than just sketches. Pressed flower samples, dried herbs, soil from the foot of her favorite plum tree. Symbols of what she'd nurtured alone. Inside the house, her parents barely looked up as she wheeled the heavy box through the back door. They were drinking tea, watching a program about legacy estates in the north. "Hope you don't regret it," Frances muttered. Eliza didn't respond. The family never tended the garden she built. But she hadn't built it for them. She built it for the woman she was finally becoming, the one brave enough to walk away, roots and ill. Eliza sat in the granary that night, knees pulled to her chest, silence pressing heavy. Only the ticking of an old wall clock filled the air, one of the few things in the house her parents never noticed, but that she had painstakingly restored. Her heart ached, pierced deeper by the betrayal of the will than the words they'd used to tear down her dreams. For 28 years, she'd tried to be enough for them, for their world, but it was never going to be enough. Not for people who saw her as a placeholder until her brother returned. Tears streamed soundlessly, not just from pain, but from something else, release. In that moment, staring at the tools still laid out from her last restoration project, Eliza realized something profound. This space, built by her, efforts insulated by her ambition, was more a home than any room in the house she'd grown up in. The truth was simple. She didn't owe them more time, more patience, or more of herself. Loyalty wasn't meant to be punishment. By dawn, her sorrow had hardened into strategy. She revised her plan. No longer would she slip away quietly with dreams bundled under her arm. She would reclaim what was rightfully hers, not just objects, but legacy, labor, love. She began with phone calls to her grandfather's old solicitor, whose records would corroborate her work, to copyright offices, filing designs and sketches with her name etched in digital permanence, to Noah. "Noah, I know it's early," she said on the call, wiping tears with her sleeve, "but I'm ready to build something real." He didn't hesitate. "I've been waiting for you to say that." Within days, they were sketching the framework of Legacy by Eliza, combining fashion and craftsmanship, each piece carrying a fingerprint of history. As her parents mocked her for packing her pointless hobbies, Eliza wrapped museum-quality watches in silk and slid them into her aluminum art box. Nothing suspicious, just a daughter they underestimated. Again, the more dismissive they became, the clearer her purpose crystallized. Let them laugh at her exit. They were watching their legacy walk out the door, one deliberate step at a time. Eliza didn't cry again after that night in the granary. Something had burned away in her, something soft that used to cling to hope. In its place stood a calm clarity. No more excuses, no more waiting. She had given her heart to her family, to the soil they planted in, to the laughing ghosts in their attic, to a home she alone had kept warm, and now she would take what was hers. She moved steadily, each day a quiet act of defiance wrapped in politeness. Her parents barely noticed at first. She began in forgotten corners, lifting old sketches off her studio walls, carefully wrapping the embroidered pillows she'd sewn by hand. Her design journals, dozens of them, went into a patterned suitcase with a brass lock. The garden tools, those stayed. They were chosen with care, but not hers to carry. She had other roots to grow. She packed memories. The wind chime she made from sea glass, old photographs where her smile hadn't yet cracked. She dismantled the mini mannequin she'd restored from a thrift shop, tucking each fabric swatch between layers of parchment. The aluminum case labeled art supplies sat like a sentinel in the corner, quietly filling with something more valuable than paintbrushes. Every night, she sorted through files, physical and digital. There were names and dates, sketches of watch parts, diagrams she'd modernized. She tagged everything with her watermark. She scanned, backed up, and registered each file through a solicitor, ensuring her claim to the antique designs. Copyright and trademark licenses arrived in neat envelopes. Her friend Noah came by often, always at dusk. By candlelight, they worked side by side, building the website for Legacy by Eliza. When he saw her drawn maps of each watch's history, he murmured, "They don't deserve this beauty, but the world will." She nodded, knowing he saw her in a way her family never had. On the fifth day, her parents passed by her room. Gerald scoffed, "Too many boxes for just clothes," but said nothing else. Let them laugh. Eliza smiled as she sealed her last crate. She wasn't just packing to leave. She was gathering everything they had overlooked: memories, proof, brilliance, devotion. The real legacy. And this time, she wasn't leaving empty-handed. TG days following Eliza's decision passed in a blur of quiet determination. While her parents still smirked behind their teacups and tossed sarcastic farewells her way, "Don't forget which way home is," Eliza kept her head down. She began organizing her departure, not just in boxes and bags, but in blueprints. In the moonlit granary she had remodeled on her own, Eliza unrolled a large sketch pad across the long work table, surrounding herself with digitized plans of her grandfather's watches, her own fashion designs, and pages of notes from the last several years. Every corner of that workspace whispered stories she had archived, designs she had traced, plates she had adjusted by hand. What others saw as outdated trinkets, she saw as the beginning of something bigger. Legacy, after all, was not about who received it, it was about who preserved it. She cataloged every watch she had restored, every nameplate she'd refitted, every inscription she'd recorded. Evidence of her time, energy, and expertise. Heritage, yes. But it was her hands that brought it back to life. And she would make sure the world knew that. Working late into the nights, she began sketching out a concept for a design brand that merged old-world craftsmanship with modern edge. Her heartbeat built into every idea: deep reds, platinum linework, gear engravings that mimicked her grandfather's timepiece mechanisms. Noah, the coffeehouse technician who'd been by her side for years, helped her file copyrights and trademarks. Together, they launched a sleek online preview, Legacy by Eliza. And then came the box, the polished, reinforced aluminum art crate her parents scoffed at on her moving day. What they didn't realize was that inside were preserved schematics, select original watches, and design templates, every artifact with her fingerprint already imprinted, legally and emotionally. The blueprint for her revenge wasn't crafted out of spite. It was born of the truth. She'd poured her whole history into their home, and now she would carry it forward. On her terms. By the time she set foot in her new Bristol apartment, Eliza wasn't starting over. She was beginning again, with the past no longer holding her down, but propelling her forward. What she had taken with her wasn't stolen. It was always hers. Eliza stood in her modest Bristol studio, surrounded by the hum of anticipation. Morning light poured through the bay windows, casting patterns across her work table, cluttered with sketchbooks, swatches, and polished watch components. Today marked the soft launch of her brand, Legacy by Eliza, and though she'd worked through every detail, her heart thumped like a ticking timepiece. She reached for the garment draped over the mannequin, the culmination of months of heartbreak, hope, and quiet defiance. It wasn't extravagant in the traditional sense, but elegant in its symbolism. A flowing midi dress in deep garnet silk, the fabric weightless yet strong, much like Eliza herself. Across the hem and cuffs were embroidered illustrations of antique watch faces, faithful recreations from her grandfather's collection, each design filed under her copyright. The centerpiece was more personal than any pattern. Sewn into the neckline was a tiny fold-out clasp, housing a gold pocket watch. It had belonged to her grandfather, a piece she'd lovingly restored as a teenager, the one she carried out of her parents' house in that art box they mocked. Noah appeared in the doorway, holding 2 takeaway coffees. It's almost time. Orders enabled in 10 minutes. Eliza nodded, smoothing down the dress's fabric with confident fingers. The studio buzzed with distant noises, the whir of her laptop, the clicking of social channels refreshing, the soft rustle of the silk as she slipped into the dress. She fastened the hidden clasp and stood still for a moment, eyes closed. This wasn't just a launch. It was the moment her voice spoke louder than 1,000 apologies she'd never received. At noon sharp, the website went live. Within minutes, emails chimed. The dress sold out in 3 hours. Comment sections overflowed with admiration for the craftsmanship, the storytelling, the striking blend of antique detail and modern grace. Vogue UK retweeted a close-up of the embroidered watches with a single word: haunting. Photos from the campaign, Eliza standing against windswept cliffs, stitched history dancing at her hem, circulated across fashion boards, design forums, collectors' communities. Legacy by Eliza was no longer a project. It was a revelation. Eliza didn't celebrate with noise. She stood quietly, gazing out at the city, holding her grandfather's watch near her collar. For the first time, the ticking sounded like victory. Teaching night of the Fall Heritage Gala arrived like a slow brewing storm, calm on the surface yet crackling with anticipation beneath. The grand town hall was decked in its usual autumn elegance. Flame-colored banners, antique lanterns, and orchestral strings trailing through the marble corridors. The Morgan family, as always, positioned themselves near the front, basking in ancestral pride. But this year, the whispers weren't about them. Guests turned as Eliza entered through the towering oak doors, poised, luminous, and undeniably changed. Draped in a finely tailored crimson coat embroidered with teach golden timepiece motifs, she radiated the elegance of her grandfather's legacy, reimagined, redefined. Around her neck hung the original Morgan heirloom pocket watch, glinting delicately under the chandelier light. Gerald choked faintly on his champagne. Frances blinked like she'd been struck. Eliza walked with purpose, graceful and unhurried. Every step told a story of neglected roots, reclaimed history, and power earned, not granted. She was greeted not as the spinster daughter of the Morgans, but as the founder of Legacy by Eliza, the rising star of heritage-inspired fashion. When the evening's host introduced her as the keynote guest, a low murmur swept the hall. Not even Gerald could hide his alarm, watching his daughter ascend the stage that once belonged to their name. Eliza spoke softly but clearly, her voice steady, her presence commanding. She honored her grandfather's craftsmanship, spoke warmly of preserving the past through creativity, and then let the truth unfold. How she had archived every artifact, fought for recognition, and built something lasting not with entitlement but devotion. And while the world may know the name Morgan, she said with a calm smile, Legacy knows the name that stayed behind, cared, and created. That name is mine. A hush fell. Then thunderous applause. Later, surrounded by reporters, a question cut through the crowd. So, the heirloom collection, is it true that you own all the copyrights? Eliza smiled again, eyes brushing her stunned parents. Preservation belongs to those who cherish it. That's what makes it a legacy. As the gala swirled around them, Frances clutched her pearls. Gerald looked away. Eliza simply turned, pocket watch shining, and walked toward the future, leaving the past to remember what it had thrown away. Eliza smoothed the silk collar of her custom blazer, fingers grazing the cool weight nestled just below her throat. The gold pocket watch shimmered delicately against the ivory fabric, a quiet, powerful emblem of everything they said she'd never be. The ballroom around her buzzed with murmurs and camera clicks, but all she could hear was the tick of time finally in her hands. She stepped up to the podium beneath an ornate banner. Dorset Heritage Gala Vertical Bar honoring tradition through new generations. For years, her family had attended as guests of prestige, nodding along to tales of Morgan legacy while Eliza stood in the corner, silent. Not this year. A hush fell across the room. Eliza lifted her gaze, her voice calm but resonant. When I was a child, I thought legacy meant inheritance, she began. An old house. Some antique watches. A family name. A few rows back, Frances Morgan stiffened. Gerald leaned forward in his seat. Theo, arms folded, wore a familiar smirk, one that faltered as Eliza continued, unclipping the pocket watch from her neckline. But I've learned legacy isn't what you're handed. It's what you choose to preserve. She opened the watch face. Etched, inside, visible to those close enough, restored by Eliza, not forgotten. Gasps rippled through the audience. The media shutters clicked faster now. I found these forgotten designs in dusty drawers, buried beneath time and neglect. I restored them not for profit, but because someone had to remember. A journalist stood. Is it true Legacy by Eliza holds the copyright? She smiled. Not just the copyright. The story. The craftsmanship behind each design. That isn't theirs anymore. It never really was. A beat passed before applause erupted, first polite, then thunderous. Eliza's parents sat frozen. Theo turned scarlet. Later, as guests gathered around to admire her display, timeless accessories infused with threadwork and brass gears, Eliza stood beneath a chandelier of fractured light and knew. She hadn't just rewritten the will, she had rewritten her own history. Some inherit family treasures. She inherited silence and turned it into a voice. Behind her, the Morgan name withered in whispers. But before her, the name Eliza Morgan bloomed. And the watch at her neck kept ticking. Not in remembrance of the past, but in rhythm with everything ahead. The door shut behind Eliza with a soft click, the last echo of her presence in the house where she had spent nearly 3 decades of her life. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was hollow. As the train rolled away from Dorset the next morning, she watched the only home she'd ever known sink into the horizon like a mirage that had vanished the moment she dared to question its meaning. Her new flat in Bristol was modest, exposed brick, a creaky stairwell, second-hand furniture, but it felt like a cathedral compared to her old world. There were no sharp voices echoing down the corridors, no weekly lectures about duty or disappointment. Just her, a kettle hissing gently, and fabrics folded neatly by design, not obligation. Still, there was an ache she couldn't name. Even with her ambitions taking shape and her brand blooming into something real, she mourned what she never truly had. A place where she was wanted, not used, heard, not hushed. She walked her new neighborhood daily, learning its rhythm, street musicians near the canal, women with toddlers gathering at the green market, a coffee cart that remembered her name by day 3. She smiled more, breathed deeper. And yet, some nights, the ghost of that granary loft clung to her, the smell of cedar, the sound of sewing needles clinking in her grandmother's jar. Old memories followed her like shadows, her father frowning at her designs, her mother snipping, "You've always been too soft," like softness was a flaw. But she no longer let those words claim her. They were bricks in a wall she had walked through, not walls she carried with her. Weeks in, when she hung her first framed pattern sketch on a freshly painted wall, it hit her. This home wasn't inherited, but chosen. She hadn't left home. She had built one from scraps of old maps and new dreams. It wasn't defined by family dinners or inherited gardens, but by freedom and possibility. Her parents' house had never truly been home. She just hadn't known it yet. Now she did. Here, in a second-floor flat with uneven floorboards and sunshine on her hands, she had arrived. TG first call came 3 weeks after her Fall Heritage Gala appearance. Eliza's phone lit up with Mum Mobile across the screen, something that once would have made her pulse quicken in anxiety. Now she let it ring. Then came the follow-up texts, sweet at first, questioning her well-being, as though the past few months of silence had been a simple misunderstanding. "We're proud of you," one read. Another followed, "Come for Sunday roast. It's been too long." But Eliza knew the difference between pride and panic. By then, Legacy by Eliza had become more than a brand. It was a movement. Young designers began sharing their stories, tagging her name beside hashtags like #reclaimed-heritage and #myfamily-didn't-believe-in-me. She'd unknowingly opened a door for many who had felt invisible in the places they called home. Her own home, the cottage tucked along the on-valley edge, was peaceful. She'd painted her workshop walls ivory and moss green, and each morning began with tea on a stone bench circled by wildflowers transplanted from the garden she'd nurtured in Dorset. Another call. This time from her father. She let it go to voicemail. They weren't reaching out because they missed her. They were reaching out because they'd lost something they thought they owned. The family's pride had been publicly inspected and found wanting. Neighbors whispered, Church friends asked uncomfortable questions. Even Theo, whose lawsuit had dragged 5 whole days before being dismissed, had grown abrupt and avoidant, blaming their parents for how messy everything had become. Eliza forwarded each voicemail to a folder labeled, "When they remembered." A part of her still carried the child who once sat with a sketchbook beside her grandfather's dusty boxes of watch parts, hopeful that one day she'd matter enough to be included. But those hopes were gone, burned in the fire of revelation. She didn't reply to any messages. Instead, she closed her laptop, stepped into her sunlit porch, and returned to sketching new designs, intricate oak leaf patterns spiraling around ancient gears. The family had called too late, and the legacy they tried to withhold had already been reborn, not in their name, but in hers. The ballroom glimmered under crystal chandeliers, each delicate prism casting a kaleidoscope of light across the polished floor. The Fall Heritage Gala was in full swing. Men in tailored waistcoats sipped elderflower champagne. Women in velvet gowns whispered behind lace fans, and at the center of it all stood Frances and Gerald Morgan, posturing as the proud descendants of a noble lineage. A hush swept the room when the doors opened. Eliza entered slowly, calmly, her posture unshakable. Dressed in a custom-tailored ensemble of midnight silk embroidered with golden watch gears, some of which mirrored exact blueprints from her grandfather's earliest timepieces, she moved like someone who belonged in every inch of the room. The gold pocket watch, a family relic thought lost, rested at her collar like a badge of honor. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that Eliza Morgan? She looks completely transformed. I heard her brand's been featured in Vogue and Timepiece Quarterly." Frances stumbled over her words when a woman from the town council approached. "You must be proud. Eliza's been chosen to speak tonight, hasn't she?" Gerald's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, the soft chime of a spoon against glass called the room to attention. Eliza took the stage. "My grandfather taught me that time, like legacy, must be cared for or it disappears," she began, her voice calm but resonant. "I grew up in a household where I was told by those closest to me that I was not enough, that my dreams were foolish, that only certain people had a claim to legacy." She clasped the watch gently. "But legacy is not inherited. It's preserved. It's what you fight for, what you nurture with your own hands, what you refuse to let die, even when those around you try to erase it." A murmur, then applause, growing louder, uncontainable. Back in their corner, her parents sat motionless, their pride slowly unraveling. Somewhere in the crowd, reporters typed furiously. The headline was already forming. Theo's absence was a silence all its own. And beneath the applause, Eliza stood alone, but never lonely, for the first time. She didn't need their name. She had her own. A gentle breeze danced over the rolling fields, carrying with it the scent of blooming wildflowers. Eliza stood at the edge of her new garden, where lavender and foxglove swayed beside tall grasses, their soft purples and golds catching the late afternoon sun. The small stone cottage stood proudly behind her, nestled near the edge of a forest just 10 minutes from Bristol. It was hers. Every inch of it whispered peace, her peace, earned and nurtured. The land had once reminded her of home, the old home, but here, in this place of her choosing, the weight of memories had shifted. Here, when she dug her hands into the soil to plant, they did not tremble with anger or longing. Instead, each flower bed bloomed with intention, with liberation. Eliza's days had become full, not just with orders and design fittings, but with a quiet joy. Legacy by Eliza had grown beyond what she imagined. First an online sensation, now a brick-and-mortar boutique in Bath, another in Edinburgh. Her designs, crafted with echoes of history and layers of care, were paraded across Europe. Not fast fashion, but heirlooms in the making. She kept every handwritten letter from customers who said they saw strength in her story. Women who said their grandmothers had been overlooked too. Men who gifted AC accessories to daughters as symbols of pride, not property. In all their words, Eliza found a kind of family, one stitched not by blood, but by shared truth. In the quiet hours, she sometimes wondered if her parents regretted what they had done. She imagined them watching her interviews on the news, perhaps hearing whispers in their small town, whispers that used to burden her, now redirected to them. But the thought no longer stung. It was simply a fact now, the way a tree grows another ring and keeps standing. Near the back of her garden, where the sunlight lingered longest, she carved a small plaque into a stone bench. For those who chose to grow, it read. And beneath it, she etched her name, Eliza Morgan, not the daughter who stayed, not the girl they took for granted, but the woman who walked away and still carried the roots, only in her own soil.